Hello Cave Dwellers, welcome to part 2 of our 2-part SGI Octane series. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, a link should appear up there somewhere, so go and click on that. And in part 1 we learned what this machine is and what it was used for. You also may have noticed that it was my first experience of using an SGI machine. I'm not familiar with the hardware and I'm not familiar with the operating system that runs on it. I learned lots in part 1 and I intend to continue that journey here in part 2 where we'll get hands-on with the operating system. So consider this to be a slightly less formal and more relaxed episode than part 1. But first, because I want us all to get the absolute most out of this episode, I think we should put some hardware upgrades in.
Getting the very most out of the Octane was with huge thanks to Kai, who not only donated the original machine, but he's also dropped into the cave for a glorious unboxing, and also an evening of beer and curry, which was a real pleasure, so thank you to Kai and to Lou as well for dropping in. The box itself was sent by Ian from sgidepot.co.uk, who I highly recommend for any SGI needs you may have. The majority of this is on loan to help us give you the bigger picture on just what this machine could do, but Ian did kindly throw in some donations for me to keep, such as these original SGI speakers, and they do raise the question, can we retro bright them? If we take the battery cover off here, you can see that the colour has changed somewhat. Nevertheless, they're an extremely cool accessory to have. The box is stuffed full of SGI goodness, and I can't begin to imagine how much this would have set you back in the late 90s, but we're talking house buying money here, tens of thousands of pounds of high-end equipment, just look at it all. So just what could we add to the Octane? Well, options include this PCI adapter, so you could add a regular PCI card to the system. In this example, it's a gigabit Ethernet adapter, and you can see on the left hand side, covered over, is one of those very delicate connectors that we saw in part 1, so I'm very cautious working around all of this equipment. Another option would be a single or dual fibre channel card like this one, and that would have made short work of shifting large files on a network or accessing fibre connected peripherals. This wasn't unique to SGI of course, but on the Octane we had a theoretical maximum data throughput of 800 megabytes per second on the crossbar switch that we met in part 1. That's about 3 times as fast as a 64-bit 33 MHz PCI bus on a PC of the day. So yes, using fibre on a regular PC was possible, but certainly not at these speeds. If video production is more your thing, then perhaps you'll like this. This is a digital video I/O card. 2 PCBs here stacked up one on top of the other, and as many BNC inputs and outputs as could be squeezed into the back of the card. This thing is packed full. The card has 3 ribbon cables on the side, and these hook directly into the main video card. Much like the feature connector on an old PC video card for example, but once again everything is turned up to 11 here, that's just how SGI did things. Speaking of video cards, I was already pretty impressed with the card that we had installed in part 1, but it was missing something crucial that this uprated board has, and that's texture memory. Our machine slowed to just a few frames per second as soon as it tried to render textured graphics in real time, and so this, an MXE card, will address that, and we can see what difference it makes. This hunk of metal here has wedged between it 2 R12000 CPUs, and each is clocked at 400 MHz, so we're putting a much bigger engine into the Octane today than we already had, and it'd be interesting to see what difference that makes. In 1999 you might have had something like a Pentium 2 333 CPU at home, but as we learned in part 1, our SGI CPUs are RISC CPUs and not CISC, like a Pentium. So clock speed alone isn't a fair comparison, it's all about how efficient the CPUs are per clock cycle, and of course how well the software is coded to take advantage of that. You can never have too much memory, so we've got an extra 512 megabytes of RAM to throw in. All of the memory of course is ECC or error correction code RAM, and this type of RAM is used in servers and machines with high value data, those ECC features protecting against data corruption and memory errors. We'll have a shade under 1 GB of RAM in total, which is a long way off the 8 GB that you could put in this machine in the late 90s. And there are more upgrades on the desk to show you, and we will come back to them, but I think right now we should get the parts installed for our demonstration so we can get lots of hands-on time with the machine and show you what it's capable of. So, with the system board on the table, we added the extra RAM, removing some smaller modules to make way for them, and reattaching the bracket to secure them in place. As with most things, that bracket was an optional extra. And then in goes the new CPU module. I do wonder these days if we get more money for the amount of scrap metal surrounding these CPUs than the value of the CPUs themselves, but I love how weighty and solid everything is in this machine. You just know you're working with high-end equipment from the period. We then threw in the new MXE video board, and while I don't know yet if I have any equipment I can demonstrate it with, we also installed the digital video board, just because it hooks directly into that video board with the flex ribbon cables. So let's install it while we have the video board going in, and we'll see what happens. Let's start with iRix, the operating system then, and it's not one that I've used before I had the Octane, but it doesn't take too much getting used to. Our capture is at a 1280 by 1024 resolution, but our new configuration appears to support much more than that. If we check the display properties here, we can take it all the way up to 1920 by 1035, which would fall under the category of HD TV resolutions. In iRix, Silicon Graphics produced one of the most stable, fault-tolerant operating systems available, which was perfectly suited to the job required of it. SGI had become dissatisfied with the Bell Labs file system that was implemented in Unix and created their own, EFS or Extent File System, in 1985. It was light years ahead of anything available at the time, supporting 2GB file sizes and 8GB volumes. In 1985, if you were lucky to have a computer with a hard disk, then 20MB would have been a luxury, let alone an 8GB volume. Later on, SGI created XFS in 1993, and that was a journaling file system which likewise was over the top, being a fully 64-bit file system at the time when 32-bit code was still in its infancy in the PC landscape, supporting file sizes of 8 exabytes, which is still mind-boggling to conceive in this day. Our Octane here runs the very last release of iRix from 2006. Unlike Windows, Linux or macOS, it's important to note that iRix is not a plug-and-play OS. This means that when you install any hardware into a system, such as a different graphics board, you can't expect it to just work. Support for it must be built into the kernel, which usually means installing iRix afresh. You'll notice as I click around the folders here just how smooth everything is, and that's because everything you see is fully hardware accelerated. Everything ties in with the IrisGL or OpenGL extensions, and we'll hear more on that shortly. So we have an OS which is fairly intuitive and easy on the eye, yet hugely powerful, geared towards real-time disk and graphics operations and supporting the huge scaling operations that SGI offered, sometimes taking machines to more than 1024 CPUs. It was also one of the first Unix versions to have a graphical user interface with the desktop metaphor, and here's a really interesting technology that came out of it. iRix is the originator of the OpenGL library, used in graphics processing, which is still in development today. OpenGL started out as SGI's own proprietary graphics library called IrisGL, but thanks to pressure from its workstation competitors such as Sun Microsystems and Hewlett-Packard, SGI released an open source version and named it OpenGL in 1992. The proprietary IrisGL would continue to be supported for some years so as not to break existing dependencies and upset customers, but ultimately OpenGL was the future, and we'd even see it on our own home PCs, competing with other libraries such as 3dfx's Glide and Microsoft's DirectX to try and become the standard graphics library on our PCs, and we have iRix to thank for that. Of course, how well OpenGL runs depends on how powerful the hardware underneath it is, so let's revisit the iRix 3D demos before and after our hardware upgrades. Distort is a little demo in which you manipulate an image in 3D. When we click on this dog, we should be stunned by 3D effects. That's not just an image, it's a texture on a plane in 3D space. And as we have zero texture memory, it runs like a dog, of course. This is a real-time demo and not a slideshow, it really is that slow. Switch now to our upgraded system and run the same demo, and well, what a difference a bit of texture memory makes. It's now silky smooth. It's a basic example, but nonetheless a clear one at just what a difference our video card upgrade has made. How about something more complex? Remember that flight sim that I showed you in part 1 and it slowed to a crawl when the textured mountains came into view? Well, the foot is truly on the other hand with texture memory. All turbulence has gone from our airplane and our frame rate is beautiful. And finally, while we're looking at real-time rendering, let's play some Quake. On our original system, using software-only rendering, it was less than impressive, but it was Quake and it was at quite a high resolution using the CPUs only, so some credit is due. But switch to the OpenGL version of Quake, and do not adjust your set, this isn't a screenshot. If you watch carefully, you can see that it's still rendering a single frame. We're talking frames per minute and not frames per second here. It's ludicrously slow as it wrestles with the textures. But if we switch to our MXE video card, that's more like the Quake I remember. It's still oh so very brown, but it moves much more smoothly. I don't however want to dwell on Quake or Quake 2 or Quake 3, all of which run on this system. As fun as it is to see them running, it's just not what it was made for. And thankfully, we've got a few good applications installed now to show you the true power of the machine. So while I prepare that, let's hear from Anthony, who used an Octane for his work and shares with us a few of his memories of the power of the Octane.
Hello Neil, and hello fellow cave dwellers. My name's Anthony and I first came into contact with the Octane 2 in the mid to late 90s. I was working for a video facility and they purchased a flame and smoke system. Now this was by Discrete Logic in Montreal in Canada, and it was part of a suite of products. You had Inferno, which was the top one, flame, flint, fire, smoke. I think that's it. Have I missed one? Probably. But you get what they were doing with the product line. Anyway, it was absolutely state-of-the-art compositing stuff. Attached to it was some fibre channel storage that was incredibly quick. It was able to record and play back uncompressed video in full 444 in 12 bits, and it was like the most responsive, buttery smooth thing you could ever use. It really was fantastic, particularly at the time. It also featured an absolutely wonderful 3D compositing interface that was able to receive lights and 3D models and projections and all play back in real time. It was an absolute wonder to behold, and of course clients absolutely loved it, and so they should. It came at a whopping £250,000 to buy, so quite the investment. Anyway, things move on, and of course other systems are now more popular, things like After Effects and Nuke, but you can still find Flame in use today all around the world on TV commercials, TV programs and feature films. In fact, if you go to autodesk.com/flame, you'll find a demo there on Mac OS. And that's sort of a port of the Linux and Unix versions as they were back in the day. It's still a product that's available on Linux and Mac, and you'll find both flavours in facilities, as I say, all around the world. And I should know because it's my job. Anyway, thanks for having me on, Neil.
And thank you to Anthony for sharing his memories of using the SGI Octane and Flame and Flint and all of those other applications. And he gave us a great real-world example of the use of this fiber. This is a dual-channel fiber card, and he was explaining how he used it to work with uncompressed video in a silky smooth fashion thanks to the throughput of the card and the Octane with its crossbar switch. So just like OpenGL, Flame and its related products continue to be developed and used to this day. So the legacy of our SGI Octane lives on. Let's take a look now and see if we can find any more examples of such applications on our Octane here.
An old man then of the 3D rendering world is Lightwave 3D, which first appeared in 1990. I remember trying this thing out on my Amiga 500 and boy was it slow, but impressive nonetheless. And it was used in everything from Babylon 5 to Men in Black, The Dark Knight to Spider-Man. Rendering here at 752 by 480 pixels, so an NTSC DVD quality for comparison. The 180 frames of this spaceship are rendered in about 32 minutes, and I'll speed that process up now so you can see all of the frames. What I really like about this is that you can choose how many threads you'd like to assign to the task, and the operating system remains nice and responsive. The remaining resources are yours to use without fighting Lightwave for them. Can you imagine trying that on Windows 98? The thing would have had an absolute meltdown. Working in real time on the models is a joy too, as you can see with this Hummer, which definitely needs those wheels adjusting. There, that looks good. And those guns, they need to be bigger. Much, much bigger. There we go. Working on a single Octane like this in the late 90s was great, but chances were you'd have had a lot of big iron behind the scenes acting as a render farm to help speed up the process. But as a standalone graphics workstation, it's still a very impressive little beast. 2 decades later, and, well, progress marches on, of course. This present-day installation of Lightwave 3D running on a modern PC does look very familiar, and of course we're getting more frames rendered in less time thanks to modern CPUs and GPUs in our desktop PCs. But we are rendering using OpenGL, so we still have SGI to thank for that. And of course, to keep everything in context, imagine your modern day desktop PC was now over 100,000 euros, pounds or dollars of specialised equipment geared specifically towards this task and not a sub £1,000 gaming PC. That is what you were in possession with the Octane. For all its seriousness though, the SGI engineers weren't without a sense of humour, and clearly someone was a fan of Spinal Tap. By inputting the switch Spinal Tap at the command line when you open the audio mixer, our mixer now allows us to take the volume all the way up to 11 instead of only 10. Now I can really test out my SGI speakers. Specialist 3D software aside, you may also be surprised to know that Adobe published software for iRix, with versions of Photoshop, Illustrator and Premiere catering to what must have been a very small audience in comparison to their Mac and PC market, but no doubt they were a very grateful audience. And if you absolutely must use some software which was only available on Windows, well, I found this. This virtual instance of Windows speeds along on the Octane, so you can get your fix of Minesweeper or Microsoft Excel. But I think that's quite enough of that. Let's get Windows off of our Octane. Thank you very much. Now, my tour of the system didn't exactly go to plan. Maya is another 3D application first released in 1998, which I'd love to show you, but, well, I appear to be lacking the required license. So here's some clips of that in action. It was essentially the amalgamation of 4 iRix-based applications: the Advanced Visualizer, Explore, Power Animator and Alias Sketch. Its development was completed in close collaboration with Walt Disney during the making of their computer-animated film Dinosaur. And it was with Disney's input that Maya became what it did, a firm favourite in the animation industry. It was later bought by Autodesk in 2005 and continues to be updated and released today, being used notably in Lord of the Rings, Ice Age and Star Wars Episode 2. But here's a piece of software I got working that you may have heard of. It's Blender, another 3D application which is still in development today. So let's render the demo scene for you here. Blender dates back to the mid-90s and it hit SGI hardware in 1998 when it was publicly released as freeware. It would go on to become an open-sourced, community-supported project across many platforms, amassing such features as soft body and fluid dynamics to create ever more realistic animations, and all the while utilising once again OpenGL. The last thing I wanted to do was to show you our video capture card, and there were frustrations again there sadly. I couldn't get the application to run, even though I'd managed to dig out some cables that would work with it. So that's something I might have to spend some more time working on, and maybe with Ian's help over at the SGI Depot, I can get this running and I can bring you some clips of that in future. Instead then we'll enjoy the fruits of our texture round one last time with this flyover of Hong Kong.
Road testing the Octane then has been an interesting and slightly mixed bag for me. I'm certainly impressed by the legacy it's left, both in its hardware and its software like OpenGL, Maya and other 3D applications which were either developed before and continued to develop on the Octane before moving on again, or started life on the Octane and similar SGI hardware of the period. And I'm really impressed with the flexibility of the hardware. Something we didn't look at earlier, which was on the table, is this. This great big box of tricks is yet another PCI adapter. We have the single card PCI adapter over here. Well, this lets you put 3 in this cage and then slot it into the back of the Octane. We've got another Ethernet card there, a SCSI card and some COM ports in there. So you can just about put anything and everything that you need in the Octane to suit your needs. But despite all this, I'm also left a little frustrated, and it's not any fault of the SGI Octane. It's my fault entirely. Giving me this is a bit like giving me a slide rule and telling me to go away and design Concord. I just don't have the skills to sit down and create a 3D animation for you in Lightwave or Blender or Maya, if I could get it working, and show you really the power of the machine in the hands of a true artist and a true professional. The hands of people like Anthony, who we saw earlier in the episode today. And when holding this up against a modern day desktop PC with a gaming video card installed, it's very easy to look at things like the modern installation of Lightwave we saw earlier and say, yeah, what's so special about this? But of course, everything has to be kept in context. I'm sure your modern electric car would put up a good fight against a Ferrari F40, but if you look hard enough, your modern car owes a debt of gratitude and a firm handshake, I think you'll find, for the performance features and indeed the safety features, although if we're talking about an F40, maybe more performance than safety. And likewise, your modern desktop PC owes a debt of gratitude to machines like the Octane. Its very DNA runs through the software that you use today, like OpenGL, and the hardware, like the Ryzen CPU by AMD, which has its own crossbar style switch built right into the chip. I've certainly enjoyed exploring the Octane today. I hope you've enjoyed spending some time getting to know it with me. And remember, it's just a small part of SGI's long and illustrious history. So hopefully we'll get to revisit some more of their machines in the future. Until next time, a special thank you to Kai, to Anthony, to Ian at SGI Depot, and to everyone who's helped me to explore this machine and helped me along the way. Until next time, thank you for watching, and goodbye.
If you enjoy my content and would like to toss a coin into the hat to support the cave, then check out patreon.com/retromancave and join the official cave dwellers you can see on the screen now. Thank you for your support.